Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the latest edition of Journey Discussions. I'm Troy Kilpatrick. I'm the Journey Museum and Learning Center Executive Director. I'm excited that we finally made it to May. It's beautiful outside, and we've got the perfect program to kind of celebrate the fact that we're in May and it's sunny and beautiful. I am watching our attendees grow right now, Mr. Mills, in the queue. And so I'm taking my time getting over to you and introducing yourself tonight. So again, I'm Troy Kilpatrick at the Journey Museum and Learning Center, and you're joining us for a Journey discussion. These programs evolved here during the pandemic, and we have been offering them on Thursday evenings, and you'll get a chance after Rick Mills is done with his presentation tonight to ask questions. We're also going to have an interactive poll that we're going to launch here momentarily that we're going to ask everybody to play with, and we're pretty excited about it. And just so that everybody knows, I already got it right. So the pressure's on all of you as guests tonight on our special poll. But so it's interactive learning opportunities. But Journey Discussions, if you've missed some of them in the past, you can see the previous programs by going to journeymuseum.org, and you can watch programs there that we've already presented. And there's so many, too many to mention. I don't want to slight any of our presenters. They're all fantastic, in my opinion. Not everybody's going to like everything, so go through and pick out the things that appeal to you the most. So let me give you a little preview. Not only are we doing this tonight, but next Thursday, our next program, we'll have all of our curators from here at the Journey Museum online with us. So you're going to get to learn a little bit about what's new at the Journey Museum in 2021. You'll be able to interact with our curators and ask them questions. But we're celebrating 24 years of being open as the Journey Museum. We opened on May 18th, 1997. Obviously, last year, we didn't have a big birthday party. We learned how to do things virtually, online, and all of those things. And this year, we're still kind of keeping it here online, but we'll be open to all of you 5 days a week beginning May 19th. And so next Thursday will sort of be a preview, birthday celebration, kickoff for our summer. And hopefully we won't look back, and we'll just keep continuing to do things, and the journey will just continue. So tune in next Thursday so you can see all the exciting things that are happening here. It's crazy to me how many really great things are happening inside the museum, given just how scary it was 12 months ago for all of us. I know Rick can share with me, we didn't know what we were up against. And I know the South Dakota Railroad Museum and the Journey were really two of the first museums to kind of reopen, try to get our toes back into the water here. The path we've been on for the last year, huh, Rick? So we look forward, both of us look forward to Rick's museum will be open this Saturday, May 8th. Will be his first weekend of operation. So for Mother's Day, you can come see the South Dakota Railroad Museum. You can come visit the Journey. We're open Saturday and Sunday. Take mom out, celebrate Mother's Day, take her to a museum. What more could mom want out of the day? Maybe lunch, right? So don't miss lunch, right? All right. So enough previews on everything. Let me quickly I won't quickly introduce Rick Mills because he's got too many notable things here that I need to talk about. Rick is fifth generation here in South Dakota from Hermosa, and he really has been a lifelong railroad enthusiast. It goes all the way back to him being a student at the South Dakota School of Mines and having his first book about railroads published while he was a freshman at the School of Mines. Now, there's a guy that's a lifelong enthusiast when, as a college freshman, he's publishing a book about railroad history. So I think, Rick, there's no way around it. You're an enthusiast. 5 books you've written so far, just 5? Sixth one, I'm sure, is being worked on. He's contributed to 7 other books, produced articles, scripts, photo essays, history publications, video publications. He starred in multiple Journey Museum and Learning Center learning forums and now Journey discussions. You have that on your resume, Rick?
I haven't updated it yet.
Rick has been involved with South Dakota Public Broadcasting, the History Channel, the Discovery Channel, and is also a presenter for the South Dakota Humanities Council Speakers Bureau. And he's also a founding, I'll call you a founding father of HaHa, and I won't tell the rest of you what HaHa is. I'll make Rick talk about that really briefly. But I'm now going to turn this over to Mr. Rick Mills. And Alyssa, if you want to post that poll while Rick talks about HaHa, we'll have all of our guests lean in on our interactive poll. All right, Rick, it's all yours.
Okay. Thank you so much, Troy. I think I appreciate you getting me into talking about HaHa, but well, as Troy mentioned, I grew up in Hermosa, and one of my first really dipping my toe into museums and those types of things was actually getting involved and starting the museum in Hermosa. And we actually came up with the acronym before we came up with the name of the Hermosa Arts and History Association. So that's where HaHa came from, HAHA. So, I can take credit for that one because in anything, especially with, in sometimes dry subjects like museums and history and those types of things, it's good to have fun with it, and I'm so pleased that we were able to and still continue to promote Hermosa's history through HaHa, and also not only its history, but its culture, its people. And that's the kind of enthusiasm that I like to see people bring to projects. And it's just, there are so many ways to look at history. This particular one that we're going to look at tonight, and I want to thank the South Dakota Humanities Council because this is one that they asked me to do because they were getting a lot of requests about hiking and biking and exterior kind of activities outside in the state. And a lot of people ask about the Mickelson Trail. And they said, I think it's an old railroad track. What is that all about? Well, I have been familiar with it for years, but this is something that I had to do a little bit of research on too, even though I had co-written a book back in 1986 with Greg Walters called The Highline Scrapbook. So I went back and I had to really kind of rethink the whole look at this because, basically you're looking at a 45-minute program and trying to tell about 110 miles of history. It's not really an easy thing to do. So I'm going to give it a shot here, and we'll try and condense it down a little bit. Now, the whole program, I do around the state, the humanities talks and stuff. I can actually come to, your group once we get through the whole social distancing and everything. And, we can do something like this online as well. But there are different ways. And once again, I do have to thank the Humanities Council for sponsoring, my time in getting this project together, because this is one of the things that I get to do that is fun through the State Railroad Museum. I'm the curator, and it's one of the things that I love and I really enjoy, and it's something that a lot of people are interested in. But one of the things that a lot of people have told me in programs is, I like being out on the trail. I like knowing its history and everything, but I didn't really know anything about it other than it just was an old train track. Well, so many people that are out on the trail now weren't even born yet when there were still trains running on this track, and let alone all the history that dates back to the late 1890s or 1880s, excuse me. So, a lot of people are seeing this for an entirely different era than we did. Those of us that actually saw trains running on there. So what I put together on this program is something that I hope will be interesting for those of you that have never seen a train on the track, but yet are history buffs and you like to see some of that history as well. Once, when you get into railroad history, it's almost like, some folks get that deer in the headlights look. There's all these names, all these different terms and everything else that are, specific to railroading. These are the names of the railroads that were actually involved in it, were operating on that line at some point. And this kind of gives you a chronology. And it gets to be a really interesting study when you're looking and you see names, you wonder how it fits in and everything else. But these are just the ones that were involved in this one part of railroad history on what we call the High Line. The High Line itself is what is now the Mickelson Trail. The High Line is what was mostly referred to by the railroad crews themselves because it ran through the high points of the Black Hills from Edgemont up to Deadwood. In the 1880s, of course, the Black Hills looked a lot different than they do now, obviously, as far as the geography, the political lines, the county lines, everything else. This is how it looked when the Black Hills were first being eyed by the railroads to come into this area. Custer County, Pennington County, and Lawrence County, radically different. But you can see the genesis of what was the railroad was coming after. And that, of course, was to get trackage into the booming Black Hills after the gold rush and after the annexation by Dakota Territory. This is just an indication, just kind of a representative look at what the locomotives, the technology was at that time. This is one of the old Burlington and Missouri River 440 locomotives. 440 refers to the wheel arrangement. And this was taken down near Alliance. This is one of the crews that was operating on their way up this way to Crawford and then also to Edgemont and on up towards the Black Hills. This was in 1888 after the tracks had reached Alliance. This is actually the map from 1904 that shows the Black Hills with the Burlington line that came up, made the little kind of curve there at Edgemont. That's where the line broke. Going to the right, the line went up to, there was the branch line spur to Hot Springs, then all the way up to Deadwood, Lead, and the northern Black Hills. And then, of course, the Spearfish line. Then from the left to Edgemont, the line went on up to Newcastle, Gillette, and on to Billings, where it connected up with the Transcontinental Northern Pacific Railroad. But this was the basic setup of operations in the Burlington that constituted the High Line. And it gives you a good view for, the geography we're going to be talking about. Talking about the geography. What do you do when you build a railroad? You have to have station stops and places where you can take on fuel, take on water, load not only people and freight, but cattle, and these are the towns really at about the time of the Burlington's, I guess I would call the high water mark, right around 1900 with the most depots. And you can see all the way from Edgemont on the south, going all the way up to Deadwood and Lead. And then also it shows the towns, or actually more like the mining and timber camps in Spearfish Canyon, all the way down to the Spearfish line from Englewood. This is probably the earliest photo I've ever found of Edgemont, and this would be in the 1890s. This is the first image that I've seen of the roundhouse that the Burlington line constructed in Edgemont for servicing locomotives. You can also see the black smoke coming from one of the smokestacks over in the machining shops in back of the water tower, and then some of the foreground here, some of the town, center part of town. In the back, of course, you can't see it because it's not detailed enough, but that, of course, is the line, or the area where the line headed off across the Cheyenne River flat there, and then headed up towards Deadwood in the background. Probably one of my favorite shots of Edgemont, and this is, of course, Edgemont. If you're looking at railroads, everything has a milepost. Milepost 0.00. And this was just the way it laid out. The Edgemont yards were on a flat above the Cheyenne River, so that there wouldn't be high water at any point. But the two trains you see, the one on the main line is, of course, the main line train between Omaha, Lincoln, and Billings. And the one in the backdrop on the second track is the Deadwood train that was waiting for passengers to get off of the main train. And and then in the background are the freight yards that where cars would be left, reclassified, and put on other freight trains and sometimes on passenger trains. In the background on the trees, there's the original Burlington Hotel that you can see the roof line of. And then behind there was the Burlington's Depot building. This gets into the 1960s, same location. Of course, this is a diesel-powered passenger train. Now, this one I threw in just simply because I've always had a fascination with Edgemont and the High Line. Over on the left, the kid in the white belt, obviously me when I was 9 years old. That was the first time I ever went down to Edgemont to get pictures of trains. My folks took me down there when they were starting to haul a lot of coal out of Wyoming. This is in 1974. Then over on the right, that's of course that's several years later, and quite a few pounds later. That is roughly the same spot at Edgemont, just as last summer. My goddaughter from Minnesota took a picture of me standing at the same location. So a lot of things have changed, but there are certain things that are still kind of fun to compare. And as I call, take a Paul Horsted image and kind of compare then and now. This is the beginning point of the Mickelson Trail. The Mickelson Trail was the brainchild of a group of people that wanted to save the High Line when it was abandoned in the 1980s as a hiking and biking trail. This is now the location where the trail starts in the park area in downtown Edgemont, next to a caboose that's been saved in that area. So a lot of history, a lot of reverence for not only the railroad history, but also histories of the communities and the area that the trail and the railroad have served. So when we start looking at the High Line, I just obviously do a chronological look at it. Deadwood Junction. This is across the Cheyenne River. You can see the Cheyenne as the train is just crossing the bridge there at milepost 0.05. And that, of course, is right north of Edgemont. Looking over the train, that's the roundhouse. This picture was taken in 1937. And this passenger train is just leaving Edgemont and heading towards Billings. This, we go a little bit further into history. This was taken roughly the same spot, and this was in 2015, of two Burlington Northern stack trains, containers, crossing or meeting right there at the same location. Milepost 1.1, starting up the High Line. This is train number 141. This was the daily Edgemont to Deadwood train in the 1930s. Passenger service. leave Edgemont in the morning, be into Deadwood just shortly after lunch. The same train from Deadwood, train number 142, which would have been overnighted over in Deadwood, would leave Deadwood in the morning, and they would meet somewhere around Redfern or Hill City, and then it would be into Edgemont early afternoon, just in time to exchange passengers with one of the mainline trains, either going northbound or southbound towards Omaha, Billings, Denver, or whatever location. Sheep Canyon. This is at Milepost 7.0. This was the highest and probably one of the scariest bridges on the High Line. Didn't stay this way for long. This was when it was being built in 1890. It was actually filled in by 1900 with cars riprap. Thousands of cars were dumped in here to fill this trestle in, simply because it was so dangerous to run trains across. In the early days, it was said that an engineer would start the train running, give it just enough steam, ahead of steam, so it would kind of slowly move across the trestle. He would walk ahead of it. And then the crew in the rear, either on the passenger train or in the caboose, oftentimes would walk across the back of the train. Now, why they let the passengers stay in there, I don't know. But anyway, that's one of the stories of the High Line, and this was one of the remarkable parts of the line. Here's what it looked like in 1981, and this is after it was filled in, and this is a ballast train that's going across, moving north at Milepost 7. A little further up the line, some really neat places for cyclists and hikers to explore that special region down there between Minnetonka and Edgemont in the southern Black Hills. Minnetonka Junction, Milepost 15.9. This is where the High Line was going on towards the north. But this line that you see coming right at us is the spur line that ran over to Hot Springs. A lot of passenger trains in the early days went over to take folks over to the bathhouses and resorts in Hot Springs at this point. So it was kind of an interesting little important point on the High Line. And now there's a little shack and a little shanty there at Minnetonka, where you can actually get on the trail, leave your car, and then ride or hike either north or south out of Minnetonka. Here's a shot of the 1890s of one of those passenger trains on the line going into Hot Springs, done by a photographer from the Hot Springs area at that time. A lot of business, a lot of origins of the tourism trade in the Black Hills started in the Hot Springs area. Point of Rocks. How many of you, I can see your hands up out there. No, not really. How many of you know what Point of Rocks is called now? Okay, you've had a chance to think about it. It's now Pringle. And this is a shot of one of the surveying crews in 1890, and apparently their pet deer and a few other folks on a day of rest that they were enjoying themselves while they were getting out and into the Black Hills on their efforts to build and survey the line to Deadwood. Here's a shot from up on the southwest side of Pringle. This was Milepost 32, but this is looking down on the water tower and a few of the homes in the Pringle area. And this is in the 1930s. And this is a southbound freight train that's there at Pringle, and it's taking on water there at the water tank. So a lot of neat shots showing not only trains, but the the community and how they were situated in different eras. This is one I took closer to Custer. This would be in 1985. They actually had an ice flow where a spring had run over the tracks, and apparently it did that quite often every winter. And this would be what the crew would have to do. And so they didn't derail any cars or anything. They would actually have to go in, and if the section crew hadn't already busted up the ice, they would have to take a locomotive and they would bust it, and then they would sweep and chop the ice out from the rails so the flanges wouldn't ride up on the ice and derail. So I was very fortunate to actually get a shot of this happening one time there in 1985, the year before the line was abandoned. Custer, this is a great shot of Custer, not only because it gives you a good view of the city, but it also gives you a really good view of the railroad in the foreground. You can see there's a steam locomotive. They're switching cars. A lot of business in Custer, down near where the taller evergreens are at. That's where the depot is located. You can see the depot right there. A lot of business in Custer, a lot of freight business. And at that time, still quite a bit of passenger service as well. Here's an on-the-ground view in the 30s of two trains meeting at Custer. The one that's facing us is one of the large locomotives that they used on the line. It's called the 2662 articulated locomotive. Basically, it's the same wheel arrangement and size that the Black Hills Central, the 1880 train, uses today with its two big locomotives. Really good on tight curves and on steep grades. So perfect for use in the Black Hills. Then on the train, or on the car behind it, that's a mixed car for the baggage car on the southbound train, passenger train going to Edgemont. Here's another view looking at Custer in the later years. This is in 1974. The black and gray engine is one of the Burlington, Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy locomotives. But in 1970, the Burlington was merged into what became the Burlington Northern Railroad. At that time, the largest railroad in the United States. But at that time, there was still a lot of feldspar business, some lumber, and coal traffic going up to the Kirk Power Plant. So even into the early mid 70s, still quite a bit of traffic on the High Line. October 29th, 1986, this is the last Burlington Northern freight train into Custer. Before that part of the line was abandoned. One loaded car, a caboose, and a diesel locomotive. Not very glorious, not very symbolic, other than it's just a real Spartan little train. Came up, got the one car that was loaded, went back to Edgemont. That was it. And at that point, over 100 years of railroad history had ended in the Black Hills, as far as in the center of the Black Hills. North of Custer, Milepost 48. This is from 1890. Neat shot that I found years ago in the State Historical Society collections. This is of a work train of them laying rail and ties as they build north, what I call the gray rocks between Custer and where Crazy Horse is now. Milepost 49. Many of you will recognize Matt Dillon, James Arness, and his scene in Gunsmoke, where he was running back down to the train to try and avert a problem with the Sioux Indians in this two-part episode that was filmed here in 1970 called Snow Train of the television show Gunsmoke. a lot of people still ask about this because it's still seen in reruns multiple times every year. And one of the things that a lot of people ask us about at the museum. And it's still something that people really are interested in, as well as other TV shows and movies using railroads in South Dakota. A lot of them were on the High Line between Edgemont and Deadwood. Milepost 51. This is, of course, right in front of Crazy Horse. This is one that I shot in 1982. This would have been the year before the last trains ran to Deadwood. At this point, there hadn't been much work done on the face, obviously, or the arm or anything else. So since 1982, a lot of progress, obviously. 53.5, a little further up the line towards Hill City. Just another one of the magnificent timber trestles that were built and used on the line to Deadwood. I wish I would have shot more photos back in those years, but that's why the ones that were shot at different eras are so valuable to us as researchers and folks that like trains and are interested in culture. Hill City, Milepost 60. If you look over where the boxcar is on the far left in the little freight building, roughly that is right now where the South Dakota State Railroad Museum is located. The building on the right is the 2-story depot there in Hill City. Now it's down to 1 story. It was scaled back so that the railroad wasn't paying so much tax on square footage in the 1970s. But you can get a good view back up towards the main street of Hill City. The building to the left above on the 2-story, of course, is where the Harley dealership is now. And then the building right over on the corner of the depot, looking up Elm Street, that is where, that of course at that time was the Harney Hotel. Now it's the Alpine Inn. Here's one of the big articulated locomotives at the water tank in Hill City. This was in 1941. Gives you a good perspective of how big these locomotives were. Another view of the depot when it was being used for both freight and when the 1880 train started operations in the late 50s. This is in the 1960s. Yes, you can call this a Union Station because 2 different operating railroads were operating out of here. More than one locomotive or more than one railroad constitutes a building if you have an operator in there that's controlling both operations. So, Hill City Union Station. Here's a shot of people on the train getting ready to leave Hill City and a freight train running around on the sidetrack coming through Hill City. This would be in the early 1970s. The track in Hill City left the main there at the right there at the depot and went over to Keystone. That, of course, is the track that the 1880 train operates on now. And this is an early shot that I found many years ago of a train on the spur line to Keystone in 1910. Here's Oblivion, halfway between Hill City and Keystone. This is when both steam and standard gauge, both narrow gauge and standard gauge trains were running with steam locomotives between Hill City and Keystone in the early mid-1960s. And of course, the folks climbing all over locomotives and everything else, well, that'd be a little bit frowned on today for liability reasons, but everything was fair game in those days. Moving north out of Hill City, a little further up the really scenic part of the High Line, Milepost 71.3. This is between Redfern and heading downgrade towards Mystic. This is about milepost 74. This is another picture taken in the 70s of an empty coal train that's moving back down towards Edgemont, running over the Castle Creek trestle that spans Castle Creek as well as the county road there. And here we are at Mystic. Here is train number 141, kind of dusting its way into town. A little bit of steam and smoke coming down there, and this is right down in front of the depot that stood there. And this, of course, is where a lot of folks from Rapid City get excited about the High Line, is because it's where the line in the early days was just a station stop on the Burlington, but then later on, it was where the Crouch Line actually interchanged with the Burlington Railroad. And of course, when I say the Crouch Line, there are many different names for the Crouch Line, but the one that's probably the most familiar was the Rapid City, Black Hills, and Western. And this is their turntable they had there to turn their locomotives and little motor cars, and for the run down the 33 or so miles along Rapid Creek down to Rapid City. This is one of the neat shots of an earlier locomotive that they had up there. Just a fascinating operation. But of course, I'm not telling anybody that's a fan of the Crouch Line how unique and how remarkable its history was, not only in railroading history, but also in the area history of Rapid City and the whole Black Hills. Here's a neat one. July 4th, 1910. This, of course, is the Burlington station they built so that they would have a Union station in Mystic, because the Burlington trains, as well as the Crouch Line trains, were stopping there, interchanging not only freight, but loading passengers across the platform and interchanging traffic there. So Mystic became quite a little place in its day in railroading history. And of course, from 1906 to when the last Crouch Line trains ran in 1948, Mystic was a Union depot town. Moving further north, Rapid Creek, 77.5. This is what they have done with the existing trestle that stayed in place. Remarkable work that the Game Fish and Parks and all the other contractors did with the restoration and getting the line in place, not in place, but back in shape, so that folks can enjoy not only the riding aspects of bikes, but also just hiking and just enjoying the Black Hills on one of the premier hiking and biking trails in the United States. It's consistently within the top 10 of when you see different rail trails ranked, and for rightfully so, because it was essentially an amazing railroad, and why wouldn't it be the same as a biking trail? Many of you remember the standby mill that was near Rochford. This was taken in the last year of the train's operation in 1983. And by that time, the standby was starting to cave in the middle. But this is probably one of my favorite shots of anywhere along the High Line, because it shows the train. It shows the old weather ties in front of the train, but it also shows the mining history of the Black Hills. The 1880 train did make some trips in the 1960s, 70s, and into early 1980 between Hill City and Deadwood. Well, when you don't have a water tower and you don't have access to a fire truck, what do? Well, you have to pump out of a pond or out of the creek. And this is what they're doing near Rochford. And this was taken in 1976 on one of the trips up to Deadwood. Private varnish. What do I mean by private varnish? Varnish means passenger cars. This is actually in the late 1960s when private varnish was still allowed on the Burlington Railroad and other railroads. If you had your own passenger car and you wanted to go to a certain destination, you would pay a certain rate and you could actually hook your cars to a freight train or a passenger train if the railroad approved of them. This is one that was going on, I believe, in 1968. And this is a freight train hauling private varnish between Edgemont and up to Deadwood. Folks would go up to Deadwood, spend a few days of their vacation. Then a few days later, they would have the train couple the cars back up, and then they would head back down to the main line and back to Omaha or wherever the cars came from. So kind of an interesting way to take your own vacation. 85-3. There were 4 timber line tunnels on the High Line. This, to me, almost looks like a model layout, a model train. But it's a photo that the engineer got out and took a photo up at Milepost 85. And just some remarkable photographic locations along the High Line. Dumont, milepost 93.6. There's another one of train number 141. Dumont was the highest point on the line that was, a part of the High Line to Deadwood. There were a couple of other parts of the branch up around Lee that may be a little bit higher, but this is the one point on the branch line that the Burlington said was the highest point on a regularly scheduled operating line on the Burlington system. And that, of course, was everything from Chicago to Denver and then up here to the Black Hills and on to Billings. Another neat shot at Englewood of 2 articulated 2662s bringing a train downgrade towards Deadwood. Just a remarkable series of locomotives and operations in the northern Black Hills. Steam, later diesel, standard gauge, narrow gauge, mining, logging, milling, just so many different models of trains, and other folks have done research on the Black Hills lines. And of course, the High Line is really a big part of it. Let's talk about the Spearfish Canyon line for just a minute. A lot of you have seen this, this type of colorized postcard. This was in the canyon. Off to the right, it shows one of the twin trestles that coming down from Trojan, the Portland area, down to Elmore, and then down on the far left, you can see the line down on the bottom of the canyon, which is now, of course, Highway 14 through the canyon. And just a remarkable line, operated from 1893 until 1934, when parts of it were washed out and it was never rebuilt. Here's a shot down almost at the end of the canyon, closer to Spearfish, of a train down there coming out of the canyon. And it's a mixed train, freight as well as passenger cars coming down the line. Early one of the earliest I've seen of in Spearfish. Really neat shot of a custom passenger car that was used on the Spearfish line, as well as an early shot of the depot when it was new. But let's get back to the main part of the High Line. For many years, from the 1930s until the end of the service in 1983, the majority of the traffic and the tonnage on the line was coal going to the Black Hills Power and Light plant at Kirk. Of course, the majority of that power is being used in the Northern Hills and, of course, at Homestake Mine. This shows the tipple and the the dump station there at the power plant, and cars being shoved into the dump so that they can be dumped and going on and down into being processed. Here's number 91. This engine actually served from 1947 until 1981 in Deadwood. It was the only locomotive on the Burlington Railroad, a small switcher, that had snow plows on both ends because of the snow that was always up in the northern hills. And it was ideally suited. It could get around in places that, as a smaller locomotive. It could shove cars up and down on the different grades up to the power plant, serve the different spurs that went into Homestake, and switch the yards and everything in Deadwood. Just a remarkable little locomotive. And like I say, it's served for many years. And remarkably, this engine is still around today. It's being used at a car repair facility down in Kansas City. I guess when I win the lottery, one of the things I'd love to do is actually buy it from them and somehow get it back to the Black Hills and restore it in its original Burlington or else Burlington Northern colors, because there just aren't many of these little bugs around anymore. So kind of neat that it still exists. Of course, not every picture can be pretty. This one was, I believe, at 98.7 as far as the milepost, but there were more different wrecks, derailments, and like this, a rock slide than we're able to count. But this would have been just down below Kirk as you're heading down towards Pluma. This, I believe, is probably around the year 1900. To get into Deadwood, the Burlington had to work with the narrow gauge Deadwood Central Railroad, which basically hauled ore and then also hauled passengers between Lead and Deadwood. The Burlington built this really neat, ornate depot in Deadwood. For reference, look over to the left, and if you're familiar in Deadwood, the building on with the white stone, that is the Martin and Mason Hotel. And this would have been taken this image would have been about 1900. 106.83. That is the mileage and the milepost when you come into the Deadwood yard on the Burlington. This is a neat shot that I just came into my possession this past spring, or past winter, I should say. Here's the size proportion between a standard gauge locomotive on the left and one of the Deadwood Central narrow gauge ore hauling locomotives on the right. Just kind of a neat comparison, and it showed a lot of, how much difference there was in a lot of the operations on the Burlington. And not only on the Burlington, but other railroads in the Black Hills that were standard gauge versus narrow gauge. Women actually put into service and working for the Burlington during World War I, working in the yards in Deadwood and also in the engine house, helping to keep the war effort going as far as keeping locomotives serviced and fueled and everything else that needed to be done while there was a shortage of workers during World War I. Also happened during World War II. Here's a shot of some Burlington locomotives in the 1960s. For perspective, this today is the parking lot just outside of the Homestake Adams Research Center. It looks kind of up towards over to the hillside to the left. That'd be over towards the Deadwood Lead Hospital today. Last train from Deadwood, November 8th, 1983. This is the last one that came down all the way from Deadwood and all the way to Edgemont. 2 locomotives on the front, regular road locomotives, the switcher, a gondola of scrap, an empty cyanide container car, and a caboose. Once again, last trains aren't really all that ceremonious. You know, I mean, they aren't very glamorous or anything, but this is sitting while the crew had a meal, went uptown, had a meal next to the old Feldspar mill there in Custer. It just is a remarkable history on the line, so many different operations and everything. Luckily, I was able to document some of it myself. This is the last one I have in this image. This is another one that I know is here on the High Line somewhere because it's the front end of a 2662. But why he's pulling up grade, he's throwing a cloud of smoke, but there's a guy standing up on the left side there. And I don't know what the story is, you know, why the photo was taken or anything else. But once again, that's one of the fun things that, you know, you get into with history. So I thank you all for being involved here. Let me kind of get back to Troy, and I think I kind of stepped over him on a couple of things as far as our quiz. So maybe we better have our quiz now.
Well, no, you did not, Rick. And I want to thank everybody who played the quiz. The question of what is the closest town to Mileposts.
Okay.
Rick did give the answer away throughout the course of his presentation. So if you didn't answer right away, I will say that we have a knowledgeable audience, Rick, as the bulk of the answers came in as D Mystic, which was the correct milepost. We're trying to trick you with Pringle, Redfern, and Dumont. So we fooled a few of you who voted obviously before Rick made it to that part of his presentation. But
I imagine probably Springhetti was one of them that got it right.
No, he didn't vote.
No, he didn't vote. Okay.
I don't know if that's true or not, Don.
I
know Don's on tonight. I would like to thank everybody. We've got a really large audience here tonight. We had close to 50 pre-registers. We're in the 30s right now. So it's really awesome. I know Rick and I both wish we could see you all. And we hope you're enjoying what we have. Rick, I have more questions than I normally have. So get ready to go to work here.
Let's do it.
Yeah, well, we've got an inquisitive group in addition to a large group. So the first couple questions I'm going to throw at you are more operationally based. And one of them, I'm sure, came from the slide that you showed of the locomotive pulling water out of the pond there. And so the question was, what would happen if you potentially pulled rocks through while you were at a creek or a pond? What would happen then to the locomotive should you pull some rocks through while you were pulling water in?
Well, actually, the water itself would have gone in the tender, and there is a screen between the tender, the water tank, and where it would be going into the injectors and into the locomotive. So you would never have the chance of, you might get some dirt and maybe some fine stuff, but honestly, you could get that in almost any tank or anything, but you wouldn't get anything big enough to be a problem.
You wouldn't have to pull over to get that kind of sediment. You could have got it right at the yard, is what you're saying.
That's very possible. Yes.
And then again, based on a slide that was shown, what type of passenger car was shown, I believe, in a Spearfish Canyon slide that you had up there, Rick? Do you have that at your fingertips?
I don't, but the passenger cars, it was kind of interesting on the Spearfish line. They not only used regular cars, but also there was so much business as far as tourism early on. They actually built some special cars out of coaches where they actually had a wider, longer open end on them. And I don't have any up close photos of those, but they had some of those because people like to sit out on the semi-open cars, even though they had a roof, and watch the scenery go by. And so the Burlington actually built 2 cars for that service down in their shops in Lincoln. And I actually have one up at the museum that's in HO scale that one of our members built. And if you come up to the museum this summer, you'll be able to see that, because I put that out there on a special display because so many people ask about excursion trains in the Black Hills, excursion trains in South Dakota. And so we put that out there so they could see what it looked like if you were riding a tourist train, in Spearfish Canyon.
Well, so now we naturally segue into another question here, Rick, and that is I've got a viewer wondering if you would ever foresee a return of passenger rail service in the Black Hills, because obviously it is a beautiful area to be able to go and see some stuff.
The short answer is no. I just, other than what we see with the Black Hills Central, the 1880 train, I don't see any way that could potentially happen. I know there's been a real flurry here in the last couple of months with the whole Biden initiative about reinvigorating Amtrak and everything else, but South Dakota, let's be honest. We have population in South Dakota that's about the same as a good-sized suburb in some communities. And you have to have a really substantial traffic base to make Amtrak possible. Now, that being said, passenger service has always had to be subsidized. I don't care whether in the heyday of railroading or not. You had to have like mail contracts, you had to have baggage, you had to have other things, because passenger revenues do not support passenger service. You have to have either federal or some other kind of public subsidies. And unless we were able to come up with some kind of a tie-in to like a service, and I'm just throwing this out. This is not part of anything that's under consideration. But let's say they would put in some kind of a 3-day-a-week train service or bus service between Sioux Falls and Omaha to connect up with train service in Omaha. Or if Cheyenne would ever get train service, we could put a bus service into the Black Hills that could run a few days a week or whatever, and capitalize on that and still be part of the Amtrak system. But otherwise it's not feasible. It just really is not feasible.
It's expensive, right?
Beyond expensive. I mean, let's just say that it's even getting the tracks and everything up to state where they would be viable is, we're talking minimum $1 million a mile. Yeah.
But it sounds good. I like the idea. I'd love to ride a train through the Black Hills.
I would love to see one between Rapid City and Sioux Falls too. But it's for our population and what our state could contribute to the subsidy of it. I just don't ever see it happening. A lot of things would have to change. And I'm afraid a lot of things would have to change up here as far as Americans, as far as how we operate, as far as doing travel for that to happen too. We are a little too independent. A lot of us would much rather get in the car and be in Sioux Falls in 5 hours, driving 85, 90 miles an hour, than go to the depot in the evening, get on a train, and then be there the next morning, even though that seems like a really good deal to me. But once again, it's gone too far. If we would have never gotten rid of a lot of the passenger trains, we might have had a chance.
Well, Rick, just remember this program is recorded, and you were talking about driving 85 to 90 miles an hour. So
not me. Not me.
Okay. All right. Hey, I want to take you back into, I've got a kind of a sequence of questions here in regards to, how the railroads are managed here. So I'll start off with one of the questions was posed is where were the operational headquarters for the trains that operated in the Black Hills? Were the bosses nearby? Were they located in one of the communities here? Or were the decisions for the railroads made in other places like Omaha, Chicago, somewhere outside of the Black Hills?
Well, I think for our purposes here, we'll talk about just the Burlington tonight, as far as the High Line. Their offices.
I know that's a complicated question.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's see if we can't get it down to every town had its own type of depot. Now, in Deadwood, there would have been an agent, a traffic agent, and, in those days, they would have been able to make a lot of their same, those decisions right in Deadwood. But then you get down to Edgemont, there's a whole nother set of people that would have the same operations titles, and they did the same things in Edgemont. But they then all answered to Alliance Nebraska, which was the Alliance division. And there were all sorts of different divisions on each railroad. And then, of course, all these divisions answered to Chicago, which was the head of the Chicago, Burlington, Quincy Railroad. So that's kind of the hierarchy that the Burlington went by. Now, there were different things, that certain, depending on the question, they would be able to telegraph somebody or contact somebody in another area. Let's say somebody in Denver might have a better idea. They could actually go that way, but still have to route through like Alliance to Denver or whatever. It's
not a simple infrastructure, it sounds like.
No, it really wasn't. But in its day, it was the way to communicate, the way to operate, the way to, it was, like I say, in the museum, I say telegraph is basically the grandfather of the cell phone, and of the internet, because that was the way that everybody communicated to different offices and everything else. And the string of paperwork and the carbon papers and everything else that we find when people bring us materials, it's just remarkable. And these people had to be so organized and so methodical in how they kept records so that they had a paper record. It's just like now, you kind of have to, keep a list of all of the emails sent so that you can keep a string of what's going on. But yeah, it was a very complicated hierarchy.
Well, and that's fascinating to hear about that. Along this line, the question is asked about labor unions. Did they play a role in the operation of the trains here in the Black Hills? Was that something that was around? Today we probably think of a union, but I saw you nodding no. So,
Well, no, early on, no. But by the time of the union issues coming to a head in the 1880s, 1890s, when there was so much, you only have to go back to like the Great Pullman Strike of 1894, when unions really took a hold of things on a national level. And then, of course, the railroads began to really be, I'm not sure the right word. Be governed by the unions and how they felt that their employees should be governed. And then there became all sorts of other unions for all the different crafts. You had them for engineers and brakemen, for firemen. You had them for the maintenance of way employees. And sometimes they wouldn't cross each other either. So, there became a lot of different things within the railroad companies that certain folks couldn't, work on tracks because of existing agreements and everything. So, that is another entirely, huge issue to get into that. There have been books and dissertations and everything else about how those things operated. And, it's just, and of course,
as we scratch that surface, Rick, Of course, I've got a question in the queue here too about pay scales and all those different jobs. And I think part of what you just illustrated there is that it would be possible that the conductors union is on a completely different wage scale system than, say, the yard hands or the engineers is what I was gleaning from that. And again, maybe not initially, but as all of this evolved.
Oh yeah, definitely. Then you start getting into the whole seniority issue and everything else. And as those things became standardized across the country, then things really stabilized. But I mean, in the early days, after the Civil War, everything was game. I mean, even to the point of time zones. The railroads were the ones that actually came up with the concept of standardized time zones, the 4 time zones. And they were the ones that initiated it in 1883. Otherwise, we still could be, celebrating, a high noon in Hermosa and 12:05 in Hill City. Who knows?
Well, so do we have the railroads to thank for daylight savings time too?
Oh, probably. Yeah, it's probably their fault. Probably their fault somewhere. No, I think that's a bureaucratic thing, but let's just go beyond
We'll stay out of that. The time zones is interesting. There was a reference in the question queue about hobos. There's that connection of folks jumping on trains. Was that something here in the Black Hills at all?
It was and it wasn't. I mean, because some of the lines in the Black Hills were kind of dead end, locations like going to Belfouche or to Deadwood or whatever. There was traffic where they could ride in open cars and stuff, but you didn't really see it as much as you did on main lines that were going east and west and north and south. A lot of times they were trying to really get somewhere. And that really, the Black Hills was kind of I wouldn't say a backwater in that respect, but it was because the only real main line that came through the Black Hills that really was going somewhere was the Burlington through Edgemont up to Billings. So, I mean, you would have seen more in Edgemont than you would have, say, in Rapid City.
There just wasn't people trying to get from Redfern to Dumont too much.
Well, not on a daily basis, no.
Hey, so for all of you who are listening to the Journey discussion, I'm going to give you a last call for a question while I ask Rick one question of my own personal interest. And you guys, he can go on about trains, but part of the interest of presenting the Mickelson Trail here too is the idea that we can all get to this right now. And so, Rick, I'd like to get out and hike. Is there a 5-7 mile section that you would say, Troy, drive to this location? This is really going to provide you with some of the coolest vistas. Do you have a favorite section? I know you've got them broken down by the mileposts. Or should I just go? I know I should do it all, but I want to pick one. What would you pick?
If you want to just hike it, I guess I would suggest the stretch out of Mystic, because either way out of Mystic is just tremendous because you get the timber trestles, you get the timber tunnels, you get grades, you get old mines, you get just a lot of history. I think that's probably, and it's kind of centralized, but I mean, honestly, all the stretches that I've ridden bike on and walked and, for that matter, rode trains on back in the day, there's not a bad stretch on the whole line. It's remarkable what you see from the railroad line that you don't see from the roads. It's just, even the stretches, now, like a lot of folks in Hill City will bike between Hill City and Custer because they get to go by Crazy Horse. Even down on the south end, folks will stop at Minnetonka, bike all the way down to Edgemont because a lot of it's downhill. But yet you get to see an entirely different type of geography than you do in the northern Black Hills. So I mean, it's obvious why it's all usually in the top 10 of trails in this country.
Well, one of the things that I just really embrace here, and I think that's what we're really fortunate out here in the Black Hills, it's amazing to me how much history, how many places, how much stuff we have right around us here as locals. And so this is just another opportunity. And again, I was really happy, Rick, that you could do this in May. We're all not knowing exactly, everything's getting better. Everybody, we're all getting vaccines now. And so, we're going to come back to a little bit closer to how we kind of used to experience things. But being outdoors, we knew that was safe. We know that's safe to get out and enjoy in the Black Hills, and this trail is a wonderful asset for all of us. And so, Rick, I thank you so much for your time here tonight. And I thank all of you viewers who keep supporting us. And we appreciate you. I know both of our museums, we thrive on having members and people coming and supporting. And I know Rick wouldn't turn down a donation, and the Journey doesn't turn down a donation. The Journey discussions are available so that we can continue to reach out to everybody at this time. And Rick, you're getting lots of kudos as I'm wrapping up here. But folks, we've come to the close of tonight's Journey discussion. Next Thursday, we're going to open the new season, celebrate 24 years of the Journey Museum being in place. But Rick Mills, thank you. You open this weekend. Good luck this summer. I know you won't need good luck. You'll just be great at what you do up there.
As will you, my friend.
And for all of you who join us, I need to always close with somehow, some way, the journey continues. Thank you all for joining us.
You bet.